Hello, in this video I'm showing you a line in King's Indian defense from black side. This line occurs from this move order, knight f3, knight f6, and after a couple of more moves we reach the first juncture. So after this, white plays e4. And here usually black plays d6, which enters the King's Indian, but the main line. What I'm showing you here today is e5 immediately. So it has the potential to transpose, let's say, if we go bishop e2, castles here, d6, d4, and we get the classical King's Indian. But after e5, usually what white does here is he either captures on e5 or he pushes d4. I think what we should do first is to cover the d4 move. If white plays d4, we can take that, and if knight captures, we can castle. It might look at first that it's the same thing as in the classical King's Indian, like after d6, d4, castling bishop e2, e5, castles, ed4, knight d4. But there's a difference. So we have d6 and short castle included. But in this case, in this line, if white pushes d4, you're gonna capture, castle, bishop e2, and white still hasn't castled yet. And black has enough time to put some pressure on the e4 pawn by rook e8. And after a move such as f3, we can go c6 now. And then push for d5, which is very good for us. If you try to remove the knight to defend d5 as much as possible, I think it's still possible to push d5. And in case of capturing, you can take back. If white takes on d5, you have queen b6, and I think black has enough play to disturb white's development. You can continue with knight bd7 or first bishop f5, knight bd7, something like this. If white cannot castle, that's a huge problem for him. So after c6, what can white do? He can go bishop f4 here, but still there's d5. After the pawn center collapses from white side, it's going to be much easier for the light square bishop to come to life. The bishop is going to become powerful after some exchanges, potentially, if this knight gets exchanged for this knight. Overall, this looks very promising for black. The point of this line is to simply not waste a tempo with this move, d6. Because in the main line of King's Indian, we have something like this, and black has the same ambitions if he takes on d4. He wants to push c6 and then to go for d5, but here white has a tempo up compared to our line. But let's go back to the most played move here. Let's take a look at what happens if white captures on e5. First of all, I want to show you the line which is not very good for black, which might be very tempting, but I will show you that it's not such a good idea. It's this move. Knight takes e4, and the point is after knight captures, you can take back the pawn. And you might be happy at first, because you don't have a pawn down. But now white gets a very quick development. After d4, bishop g7, he can first provoke your f6 by bishop g5, and he can go back, go queen d2, and castle queenside, start pushing h4, h5, and I wouldn't recommend this. Play this only at your own risk. I didn't tell you to play this. What do you have besides knight e4? You can play castle. That seems like the best move in this position. Here, I think the most played move here is knight f3 back. And now we can attack the pawn on e4. Now white has two options, I think. First one is bishop d3, which is quite peculiar. Blocking the bishop on c1, but you also have to find a way to deal with this. I found an interesting line here, which begins with b5. Now if you go cb, I can push d5, and eventually this pawn is going to be lost. So after e5, knight g4, and you will capture on e5. Still, you're a pawn down, but you have a very active position. If knight captures, you can push d5 still. And in case of this, bishop a6 with the threat of c6. Because the bishop is currently not defended. And that's a huge problem for white now. What else? After b5, if white simply castles, that restores the balance, materially speaking. bc4, bishop c4, we can take on e4, and after this, I cannot capture with my rook because of bishop d5 at least. I have to play d5, and once again we have a very good position here. White can play, let's say, d3, we can take on c4, take, exchange, and go knight a6. We have bishop pair, and I think this is sufficient for compensation. You can go rook b8 to put pressure on the b2 pawn, and I think we are doing just fine here. Bishop g4 might be also one plan to try to shatter the structure, but I would keep the bishop pair. Let's go back. After capturing on e5, we can castle. He goes back to f3, rook e8, and now we saw bishop d3, after which I proposed b5. But what happens if d3 happens? Well, we can push d5, and in case of cd, we can take back, and after bishop d2, we can go c5. And now white has a pawn up, but also this pawn, this extra pawn is a target on d3. So black's plan is very simple. He's going to try to stop the pawn from pushing to d4. We're gonna go knight c6, maybe b6, and play very, very slowly. Our main plan should be to stop the d pawn from advancing, to keep this pawn backward as much as possible, and eventually to put pressure on this pawn by doubling the pieces on the d file. So let's recap quickly. This line only appears after this move order. After e4, we play e5. And first of all, if white goes d4, we take it and castle. We have quick development. We will go rook e8 next and c6. For example, bishop e2, rook e8, and in case of f3, we can go c6. Also, ideas like queen b6 and knight takes e4 might come to mind if the knight is not defended second time. Some tactical blow like this might appear on the board. So that's what happens on d4. You take it, castle quickly, and go rook e8, c6, d5. If white captures on e5, that's a different story. We castle, and in case of knight f3 back, we go rook e8. And now if bishop d3 happens, we go b5, with the idea to get our d5 much quicker. I think we can get d5 immediately, but I think it's more interesting this way. After d5, if you take, then d5 is much stronger, because there's no defense on c4 anymore. And if you go for knight takes b5, then we push d5, and after cd, we go bishop a6, with the idea of c6, to capture the bishop. For example, if he goes queen c2 here, we can also take on e4. We can take on e4, or we can take with a knight like this. We can take, we can take knight d5 and also have ideas like knight b4 or knight f4 as well. And also if white castles, we can take and take on e4. But remember, don't capture twice, push d5. Because on rook e4, there's bishop d5 and that's a problem. So after we play d5, white is still having a pawn up, but also here be careful not to take because of and rook c8. After which the rook on a8 is completely stuck, knight on b8 as well, and that's no good. The best is to go just knight a6 and continue rook b8 like I said before. The final point, after capturing and castling, what happens if knight f3, rook e8, d3 happens? Then we push d5. And if cd, knight d5, we can go bishop c2 and c5. After which we go knight c6, and try to put pressure on the d3 pawn. And that's everything.